Over the past 5 months, I have fully completed 2 mega Middle-earth dioramas, this monster Helm's Deep layout and the top level of Edoras. And you know what? I am addicted to the completionist dopamine buzz of seeing these gorgeously finished layouts. So today, we are fully finishing another mega Middle-earth layout. It's kind of a big deal. It's not only the biggest board I've ever built, it's also the project I've been working on the longest. It is time to finish once and for all Minas Tirith and the Siege of Gondor Megaboard.
This mental Warhammer layout traces its origins back to the very beginning of Zorpazorp. Comprised of 3 monster sections, 60 square feet of the flooded city of Osgiliath, 48 square feet of the corpse-laden, fire-burning Pelennor fields, and then the star of the full layout, the white walls of Minas Tirith.
Siege of Gondor mega layout. This is mental.
Everything you see here was built over a 12-year period back in Australia, but I could never call the board finished without one incredibly important region of the city of Minas Tirith. As soon as we landed here in New Zealand, I set to work on one final section of Minas Tirith, arguably the most important piece of the entire diorama, the outer gates and the inner courtyard. This layout was absolutely intense, and I challenged myself to build the ultimate hybrid of screen accuracy and playability, referencing the original sets built out in a quarry in Wellington and the massive bigature made by Weta Workshop in the late 90s, and even drove out to the filming location for the mountains of Gondor to get truly inspired to build the greatest board I'd made to date and the ultimate conclusion to the epic Zorpazorp Minas Tirith crafting journey.
So what still needs to be done? Well, a hell of a lot, really. There's a big second wall that needs to be in here with a big spire of rock. There'll be more buildings built into that and possibly in the streets as well. The streets don't exist, they're just foam at the moment, and the Pelennor fields out the front of the walls. And we need a frame for this board, which I think has just become 2 boards because this thing is so damn big. So let's start at the foundation and build our way up.
So a bunch of nice dress pine was marked up, cut, drilled, screwed, yelled at when it wasn't cut at the right length, and eventually I had 2 lovely timber frames, 5 by 4 foot each, which gives us a full board size of 8 by 5, another 40 square feet of Siege of Gondor madness. I glued down a sheet of 30mm skinned XPS straight onto the frame, which is strong enough to be our foundation, and then for our front half, glued on another 20mm sheet to get our walls to the right height to match our city streets. Then I grabbed all of our wall pieces we've made so far and lined up their position on the layout and glued the southern half in place, but before the gatehouse and the northern battlement can be glued down, there is this stone pavement detail that transitions the gate into the dirt road that leads out of the city. I got some 10mm sheet and cut out a pattern that matches the stonework wrapping around the base of the battlements, and then thinned those sheets down to about 5mm thick on my hot wire cutter. Then I laid in a basic brickwork pattern with my scalpel, a pencil, and some good old scrunched up alfoil to impart a nice rocky texture, before gluing all the pieces in place and gluing in the rest of the northern battlements. One last bit of pavement to blend in the inner side of the gate, and that's enough work on the walls for now. With the positions locked, I can lay in all of the inner city buildings and streets as they are, and finally lock down our city layout.
So front wall's looking good, and that is now kind of the locked city layout for those buildings around the courtyard. And the next thing we need is our second wall. Now this is a 20mm sheet of foam, so it has a bit of flex, and I'm gonna try and put a bit of a Minas Tirith curvy wall into it. We gotta carve our brickwork, and of course, a bunch of extra buildings need to be built into this structure as well to complete this kind of city layout. But first, let's carve some foam.
Well, here we are again. Is this 2020? It feels like 2020. Big, massive time lapses of Zorpazorp foam carving on huge sheets of XPS for monster Minas Tirith battlements. Classic brickwork pattern here. Same as the outer walls, the brickwork is cut with a scalpel, then the cuts widened with a pencil to create deeper recessed detail, and then the entire surface is textured with foily and bricky, and then a bunch of random bricks are depressed to create some relief and extra detail in the stonework. Now, if we jump back to our reference, we've got some mega features that need to be built into this huge second level wall. Obviously, the monster spire of rock, which will need mega rock molds or something. But first, we need new Minas Tirith buildings. In behind the stables that face the gate, we can see several towers built directly into that wall that rise up above the courtyard, and they have a lot of intense stone detail. Arches, windows, these need to look insanely realistic and detailed because they are sitting right up against the highly detailed Games Workshop kits, which means we need to combine some foam carving with some intense resin details. And finally, here at Zorpazorp HQ, I'm going to be able to make them myself. This is the Phrozen Sonic Mega 8KS. Easily the biggest and most powerful resin 3D printer I have ever seen. Now, I've dabbled a little bit in the past with resin printing, and I've used some resin details in Minas Tirith before, with Albie from Microforge Minis sending me prints to use in the builds, but the sheer amount of resin details that we need to incorporate, and just the freedom to be able to print on demand the pieces I need as I'm inspired, means it's finally time to upgrade the New Zealand Zorpazorp studio with a resin printer, and what a beast of a setup to kick us off. So resin printing has 3 stages. We print, we wash, and we cure. And with the Mega 8K Wash S and the Mega Cure S, we're going to be able to automate as much of this workflow as possible so we can hammer out these resin prints efficiently and spend more time actually crafting. I poured in some frozen aquafine resin and fired out the test print and cleaned it up and slapped it in the curer to test out the full workflow, and happy with my kind of bench setup and flow, it was time to start printing in earnest. So in Chitu box, I chucked down a bunch of Microforge Mini slice and slot details, and as they're all pre-supported, this literally took like a minute, and then slapped them into the printer and clicked print. I let the Mega 8KS run overnight, and by morning, our first batch of archways and windows and gorgeous details was ready to pop off the build plate. After letting the plate hang from the draining hook to let the excess resin run back into the vat, I took out the plate and gently removed our first prints from the plate using the scraper. This was surprisingly easy, just a little bit of prying to pop the suction, and the resin still has enough give that they just pop right off. Then it is bath time, and the Mega Wash S is bloody massive, but for now we're just printing a few small items, so I popped them into the bottom of the basket, dropped that into the wash station, and then just filled the tub with 5 liters of isopropyl alcohol. This can go all the way up to 24 liters, but that's enough to cover my prints beautifully. Now, we don't want the resin submerged in ISO for more than 5 minutes, so I did a little 1-minute cycle just on the low setting, and that powers up the little turbines to agitate the ISO to splash and slosh all the uncooked resin from the prints. I adjusted the position of a few pieces and then gave them another run for 2 minutes, and happy that that was all cleaned up, bath time is over. And now, before we do the final cure, while we still have the resin with a little bit of give, I pulled off all of the supports.
Oh wow, look at that!
Most of these just kind of fly right off, but a few needed a little bit of a pry with the hobby knife.
Look, obviously I've seen resin printed stuff before. I know how good it can get, but this is just blowing me away. There's no kind of warping in the prints. The detail is sublime. There is not, I can't see any layer lines, like at all to the naked eye. They look phenomenal, just insanely realistic stonework. Now that we've kind of got those out of the wash and cure, they're really cleaned up. We still need to cure them. So the next step is to chuck them into the Mega Cure S, and then they're gonna be ready for painting. This setup is going to do some work for us.
The Mega Cure S has a 2-stage dry and cure function, which is awesome because you don't need to wait for the ISO to fully dry before putting them in the cure station, which is essential for keeping this workflow moving. And then after 30 minutes of drying and 30 minutes of curing, our prints are ready for pre-priming. I jumped back into Chitu box and grabbed a bunch more windows and archways, pieces that I thought would match our reference from Minas Tirith really nicely, and repeated the whole process again. And now the crazy thing about resin printing that just blows my mind is that the time it takes to print is purely defined by the height that you're printing. So one window takes the same amount of time as 20 windows. So I loaded up the plate and went crazy. Then with this second batch washed and cured, I took everything outside and gave them all a pre-prime in Rust-Oleum Grey and then a light grey layer. Resin just kind of loves to be painted with the extra binding agents from a rattle can, but watered down acrylic through my spray gun, which I use for all my foam, doesn't bond to it that well. So if we easily prime our pieces now, we don't risk melting the foam components if we try and paint these with rattle cans after construction. I also gave all these pieces a quick satin varnish, which is a little experiment to see if I can help my oil washes flow a bit better when it comes to the paint job down the track, but more on that later. For now, it's time to get crafting. Armed with my new resin details, plus a bunch more that I printed over the weekend, I kind of got a bit addicted and was just like, more resin gribblies! And then all my old accessories and foam panels and MDF jigs that I got sent from Microforge Minis, I set to work to build the next generation of Minas Tirith buildings, the final big stonework for this build. I cut down my wall panels and planned out all my arches, and then used the MDF cutting guides to slice out my cross sections, and then used the Score-O-Matic cutting guide to put some incredibly fine detailed foam stonework. As always, texturing with a pencil and alfoil before depressing some very small bricks with the back of my tweezers. Then it was time to slot in all our resin prints, and this is where the insanely high detail of the resin components really shines. All of these intricate details would just be a nightmare to do in foam, but by using these resin prints for all the hard work and the traditional foam carving for the large flat paneling, we get amazingly detailed buildings really fast. Resin printing scenery details is an absolute weapon. In fact, it's such a weapon that I basically repeated the entire process again on a second tower, and to shake things up and focus even more on these resin details, I shortened the height of each level so I could have more floors and used more arches and windows, combining a bunch of different styles, all hinting at our reference but adding depth and character to the city. Combining foam and these resin details in this way is just so powerful. Every single structure can be unique, and it just adds so much to a massive city layout. I ended up getting so hyped up on these slice and slot files, I jumped back into Chitubox and sliced up a bunch of these really cool little balustrades. They're just such fine detail, little swirling accents, and then finished our second building with a beautifully ornate rooftop terrace. I gave our second level wall a nice big permanent curve, flexing the sheet over some foam support struts and pinning it in place, but before we can mount our towers or any more buildings, we need to do the biggest feature of all, the massive rocky spire. I combed over all of my reference images of the physical set and the bigature, which do not match in many places, and realized that first I actually need to make another building that is built into the rock face. So back to more slice and slot resin goodness. Now, I've actually already built the front facade of this building, so all I need to do is extend a large terraced warehouse-style structure up behind it. I've decided that this is the Errand Rider's barracks, full of supplies to support the stables on the other side of the spire, as well as lodgings for the riders themselves. I settled on a huge amount of arches to spice up the pretty flat kind of surface, and sliced and slotted them all in place, and then glued the building up against the second level wall, and glued in place a textured roof terrace. Then I grabbed the rest of our glorious balustrades I printed on the Phrozen Mega 8KS, and glued them down on two sides, ready to join into the cliff face that will soon wrap around and over this building.
This building's looking awesome now, continues right into the second wall. Next we need cliffs and rocks, but first I want to experiment with some larger resin elements. I mean, the Mega 8KS is absolutely mega after all.
So I jumped into Chitubox and slapped in some amazing Roman-style STL files that Johan Samuelsson from JS Creative designed for his own Minas Tirith diorama. It is absolutely incredible. I've linked his Instagram down below, go and check it out. And this absolute legend sent all of his custom files over to me to help with our project. And first up is this stunning building, which is perfect for going up against our second wall. I hollowed the lower level in Chitubox and added some drainage holes so uncured resin can't get stuck inside this absolutely chunky print, and then dumped a bunch more resin into the vat, and 11 hours later, boom, we have another successful print first try. I popped it off the plate, gave it a wash in the Mega Wash S, and removed the supports, which was a bit tricky because I should have cut the roof off to be a separate piece, but with a bit of patience they came away nicely. And then for the upper level, I cut the next roof line in half and printed it up, and another successful first print, and the supports came off in like 2 minutes this time. See? I can learn stuff, look at me go. A wash, a cure, and then this absolutely stunning sculpt is ready for priming. First up, some dark grey, and then a quick assembly with liquid nails, and then a zenithal in light grey from above will do us for the time being, and then I added a little foam plinth to give the building a base.
The quality of finish is just breathtaking. It's like tiny real stonework, no layer lines. I'm blown away by how good this looks. But before I glue it onto the wall, it's time to rock.
Just like the million billion rock faces you guys have seen me carve in the last few months, I layered a bunch of plaster casts across the foam substructure, pinning them in place and then gluing them down until I had the kind of rough shape of the cliff face. I started with the southern side and then wrapped around onto the northern face, building the rocks right into our errand riders' barracks to make this feel like it's being built into the foot of Mount Mindolluin. Then I blended them all together using modeling compound to turn our individual casts into one cohesive rock face. Far out, I love plaster rock mods. Incredible stuff. And with our second level looking really solid, it's time to return to the foundation of the city streets themselves. I started with the outer walls to try and sort of remember how I made all the other Minas Tirith streets, experimenting with modeling compound, texture rollers, and then using foam trim as a detailing edge to add visual interest and protect the delicate textured compound, and those techniques worked really well. I added a bunch of other foam detailing in and around the walls, and then grabbed some polyfiller and blended all of those old 3D prints together, and now the front half of the board is almost ready for painting. While I've been working furiously on my Minas Tirith build, I've been poring over photos of my mate Dan's amazing Pelennor Field setup, except his build is an incredible hybrid of scenic materials and Lego. It is some of the coolest work I've seen in ages. Go and check out his build. I've got his Insta Bugius bricks linked down below. And in fact, Dan is actually one of my Patreons. And while all my Megazorptrons get a statue and a plaque up on the Patreon honor wall, this Lord of Bricks is actually my very first Ultrazorp, and as such, he gets the biggest statue on the Patreon honor wall to date, and Dan sent me some amazing crafting supplies that I don't usually work with to truly have Bugius bricks represented on the Patreon honor wall. What a wicked little diorama for the Minas Tirith Patreon battlements. A massive shout out to you, Dan. Thanks so much for the support, and everyone go check out his amazing Instagram, Bugius bricks.
Patreon is so important to me. It is the whole reason that Zorpazorp is still alive, and I'm so thankful to all of you incredible patrons, all these beautiful people up on the wall. If you want to support all the madness here at Zorpazorp and get on the honor wall, you could be a banner, a plaque, a statue, or even insane enough to be the second Ultrazorp, then check out Patreon, link down below. A massive thank you to each and every one of you.
Each section of street between our buildings is made from a 20mm sheet of foam, which I have kept removable for the last year, purely so that we could do this process. And our workflow here is to remove each piece of foam, cover it in flattened out modeling compound, and then after that's kind of dried and just started to cure, I use a textured roller to set an imprint of super realistic flagstones. Then that piece of foam gets trimmed down and glued back into the board. Some of them go straight in, but any pieces that have a board edge or joined to other roads need to have a small 5mm section of compound trimmed away and replaced with foam edging that is then textured and carved with brickwork. I ended up keeping the back part of our city foundation removable and glued to the base of our second wall, which is going to make storage for this whole board much easier, but with foam edging running on both sides of that join, I can protect the compound flagstones on either piece and have it look completely integrated when it is installed in the board. The only real tricky section is our central courtyard, which is actually a bunch of curved flagstones with loose dirt in between them to protect the horseshoes of the errand riders and the cavalry deploying from the gate. I did a bunch of the larger curved details just out of foam, but I needed some more spicy details, so I jumped back to the Mega 8KS and loaded it up with some new resin. This is RPG Grey, and I sliced up a massive plate of prints, including some glorious statues, fountains, and stone details that I made modifying and scaling up some of Johann's gorgeous files as well as his stunning trebuchet, which is going to look incredible up on the main walls in a little bit. Back in the courtyard, I installed my stunningly detailed resin stone ring and half ring, and then assembled a plinth with 3 massive statues which sits at the end of the courtyard at the base of the rocky spire.
So this is looking absolutely fantastic, but we have hit a bit of a snag. All of the modeling compound needs essentially about 2 weeks to dry in the kind of depths of the New Zealand winter. It's like sub-zero temperatures right now, and it's just wet. Never going to be able to paint that. I've got to go to Ireland in 3 days' time to film with Ollie from Broadsword. We cannot 100% finish this portion of Minas Tirith. So this back half is 100% built, but this front half we can absolutely 100% complete. It's ready for paint, scenics, the Pelennor Fields, the roads, This thing is gonna look awesome, and that guy is gonna have to get done in one final part 2 of the Minas Tirith finale. So close. F***ing drying times.
So up first, it's painting time for our famed white walls of Minas Tirith. I gave all the foam trim around the base of the wall a prime by hand, and then re-primed the 3D printed walls with some white rattle can to cover in all the filler and blending, and then once that was fully dry, it was time for some oil washes. First, I thinned down some grey, and essentially washed the entire stonework surface. This gives us a nice overall hue without kind of overly deepening the recessed details like a black wash would, which for white stonework works really nicely. Then along the edges of the walls, at the base, I feathered in some thinned brown oils to build up that dirt and grime, and then added streaks and dirt marks sporadically across the stonework to show the stains from water runoff during rain. While the oils dry, I jumped back to the workbench and assembled Johann's beautiful trebuchet. The advantage of the RPG grey resin is that it's almost like a little flexible, which makes the trebuchet far more durable as a gaming piece, and honestly, the difference in detail between the Aquafine and the RPG grey resin, on a piece like this, it just doesn't seem to be an issue. I gave him and all the other wonderful wooden Gribblies a Zenithal prime, and then a brown base coat through the airbrush, and then an all-over dry brush with some layered browns and bleachy bones, before picking out a few key details by hand, and finished him off with a big black oil wash. Then it's time to just plonk him on the walls in the trebuchet tower, and how badass does that look? But now it is time for the Pelennor fields before the walls. First up, some brown paint to banish the creamy foam, and then a big layer of PVA, thin just a little to help it spread, and then through a sieve, our ground cover foundation, a mix of grout and fine sand, and a few pieces of gravel and slate sprinkled through for good measure. And then I gave that foundation layer a soaking in isopropyl alcohol and watered down PVA, and now we can work our scenics in, and our first target zone is our road, winding its way out of the gate, which I built up by layering sand straight onto that grout. And then the real work begins on our grassy Pelennor fields. Our first set of scenic layers is our colour foundations, made from foam flock and sawdusts of various small grades and greeny yellow hues. Blending those together, I established the right kind of greeny pasture colours that I wanted, and the variety of materials gives great texture to represent all the low-lying foliage and clover. Our next set of layers is some aggregate and gravel blends and some coarser foam flocks. They build up the texture profile even more, adding rocks and soils and some very small kind of shrub shapes to those mid layers of our grass, and with all those layers combined, we can really see the shape and the color of the fields already, but to give it the final kiss of life, we of course need our static grass. Starting with the smallest length fiber, I built up coverage over most of the fields with 2mm dead grass, spraying down PVA to apply the grass directly onto, and then layered in some 4mm autumn sporadically across the field, but building up the length higher towards the edge of the board, further away from the city. While those scenics dry, I just had to try printing some actual minis on the Mega 8KS, so I pumped out some amazing orcs and trolls, very Minas Tirith appropriate. These are from Medbury Miniatures. I pumped them through the Mega pipeline, and then based them all up and slapped them down in the courtyard of the White City, and I am so excited to paint these guys and just explore printing actual figures and miniatures, not just scenery, in future videos. Hang on a minute, those guys don't look like the defenders of Minas Tirith.
Before we see the big reveal, this video was basically like 2 videos worth of labor. I just wanted to finish the damn thing. We got there on the front half, not yet on the back, but its time will come. But there was a bit of a delay since my last upload, so thank you so much for your patience, and I hope it was worth the wait. All of the STL files that have been used throughout this massive build are linked down in the description. Make sure you especially go and check out Albie's beautiful slice and slot range. He's got a Kickstarter that is ending in 2 days with all of these old beautiful ones and a whole new range of evil-themed architectural pieces. A huge shout out to Phrozen for supporting this project with such a mega resin printer. I've just been blown away by this machine. I have pumped stuff through it over the course of this build without a single failed print. It's kind of completely changed my attitude towards resin printing, and I'm so excited to keep exploring more of it. If you guys want to sort out just an absolute machine for your hobby setup, whether you're doing small or absolutely mega projects, use my link down in the description and you'll get an absolute workhorse of a resin printer, and you'll be supporting Zorpazorp at the same time.
So there we have the last section of the Minas Tirith Tirith Megaboard, and half of it is fully finished. I'm absolutely gutted that we didn't make the whole journey this time, but I'm proud to have at least gotten half of the board past the finish line to deliver on my promise to you guys to keep dishing out that completionist dopamine. But stay tuned very soon to finally see this board 100% complete. See you guys in the next one.